everybody knows the concept of trying to live within your means, trying to do the best with the income that you get every month as you decide how much to pay for food, for clothing, for rent. Economists formalize this concept of doing the best you can with your available resources through consumer theory. And a critical part of that is what's known as a consumer budget constraint. Now, a budget constraint is simply a way to formally depict how much income people have and how much they can buy with that income. So I want to think about, first, the amount of dollars that someone has for a given month. And let's say they have to choose between food and clothing. I mean, ultimately, you get down to the basics of life. You got an income, you got to have food, you got to have clothing. Let's set shelter aside, but these are kind of basics of life. Now, when we depict this formally, we're going to use a couple of things here. One, we're going to talk about the price of food. Okay, and let's just say that you only have one type of food that you have to buy. Let's simplify things. And PF is how much a unit of food, a basket of food, a bundle of food, an amount of food that you purchase. We've got a price for clothing. Now, I know there are lots of different kinds of clothing. There's shirts, there's pants, and so forth, but let's just kind of throw them all together. So how much you spend on food depends on the price of food and how much food you buy. The price of food multiplied times how much food you buy is the total expenditures on food. Okay, so that's one part. I can also buy clothing. This is the price of clothing. If I multiply that times the quantity of clothing, then this is the total expenditures on clothing. And if those are the only two things that I buy, then if I add the two, that's my total expenditures on everything. So this is really a kind of price times quantity plus price times quantity of food and of clothing. Now let's say that you spend every dime that comes in. You can't borrow and you don't save. You spend everything on food and clothing. You're really doing subsistence level stuff. Then we're going to say that the expenditures on food plus the expenditures on clothing is going to equal your total income. Now this might be per month or per week or per year, whatever. I don't want to focus on this, but all we're saying here is that what you spend depends on food, how much you spend on food, how much you spend on clothing, and you have spent all of your income. So you take your income and you spend it on this and that. Okay. Now, this budget constraint, which is easy to conceptualize, we want to use it in the context of a graph. I'm an economist. Of course, I want to turn what is a normal human activity into a graph that I can analyze. Okay, so let's do that. What I want to do here is I'm going to include clothing on this axis. I'm going to have food on this axis. If I go down this way, I'm buying more clothing. If I'm going this way, I'm buying more food. Now we want to talk or draw a depiction of the trade-off between food and clothing using this budget constraint. Okay, let me define one point right here. This, imagine, forget about the graph. If I told you that you had $100 of income and each unit of food cost $20. So the price of food was $20 and you had income of $20. If you only bought food, you could take that $20 and you could buy 5 units of food. That's this point right here. 5 units of food. And that is equal to your income divided by the price of food. Now this depiction can sometimes get confusing to people, but think about it in just everyday terms. If I got $100 and each unit of each bit of food I buy is $20, I can buy 5. 5 units of food times 20 is going to be $100. So this is if I only spent money on food, no clothing, because I've used up all my income to buy that, to buy food. Let's say that the price of clothing was $10. Now we want to see how much clothing can I buy with this income, or with this price. If it's $100, I've got $100 in my pocket, and each unit of clothing costs $10, I can potentially buy 10 units of clothing, which is equal to my income divided by the price of clothing. Again, it's just this algebraic depiction, but I think the concept is actually quite easy. Now, the budget constraint is when you connect these two dots. I don't have to only buy food. I don't have to only buy clothing. And let me make that a little bit of a straighter line. I can only buy clothing, I can only buy food, or I can buy some combination in between. And the trade-off between these two, the slope of this line, remember the slope, okay? The slope of this line is 5/10. It's 1/2. It's rise over run, 5/10. What does the slope of this line mean? That slope is what I'm going to call the relative price of clothing. It's the price of clothing compared to the price of food.